May 4th meeting of the Union County Board of Commissioners. And I'd like for us to open with the invocation, and I asked Jerry Simpson if he'd introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have with us this evening Ryan Bradley, who is pastor of Providence City Church and Indian Trail. You know, we talked a little bit about adding some diversity to this process, so I thought I'd work on that. So, Ryan, come on up. Ryan is a native, born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. Graduated from Wingate University, and I believe his wife, Lindsay's from Lancaster, South Carolina. I believe that's correct. Yep. I told my wife I was going to, Ryan pastors my son over at this church, and I told my wife, Sheila, that I had invited Ryan to do this, and she said, well, that's wonderful. And I said, well, I'm a little bit concerned. You know, he, from the standpoint he talks a little funny. And she said, well, as much as Union County's changed in the last 20 years, most people in Union County think you talk funny. So, Ryan's passionate about his work, his ministry, and contributes greatly to the community. And so I welcome you, Ryan, and look forward to your invocation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here today. Would you bow your heads as we go to the Lord and pray together? Almighty God, we come together today from the outset of this meeting, first and foremost to honor you, to prioritize and to praise you, and to give glory to your marvelous name, Lord. We acknowledge and rest today that you are enthroned in heaven above, and that all authority in heaven and on earth rests solely in your capable hands, and that's good news for us today, Lord. So we praise you today and come under your will and your leading, not only for this meeting, but for our entire lives. Heavenly Father, we ask for you today to bless this beautiful country. We ask that you would grant this land your wisdom, your love, and your compassion. May we be a people who are a shining light in our communities and in our world. A people who are pursuing you and your plans for us both individually and corporately. Grant us this privilege, Heavenly Father. We come also this evening to pray specifically for the leaders of our towns, cities, state, and this nation. Lord, may these servants who are in positions of authority take their responsibility seriously and do their best each and every day. May they realize their need for you and for your direction. May they hear your voice clearly as they make decisions, and may they follow your leading and guidance as they lead others. Help them today, we pray, to have a passion for people, for truth, and for righteousness. Thank you, God, for our blessings of life and liberty. May this city, county, and this country continually show the love and honor that you deserve, Lord. We ask these things in the name of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ. And everybody said amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. Let's join us in the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started, I notice that Ms. Boyd, Mr. Guzman, a couple of our Board of Education representatives are here with us, and we appreciate you joining us this evening. And our library representatives who are here, and the Weddington Town residents. We appreciate y'all coming to be with us tonight. One of the pleasantries of having this job is being able to recognize our employees, our departments, and tonight we have the opportunity to present an award for outstanding achievement in popular annual financial reporting. It's been awarded to Union County by the Government Finance Officers Association. This is getting kind of be commonplace, Jeff. And the award of achievement is the highest form of recognition in the area of government accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by government and its management. It's being awarded to the Finance Division, Administrative Services, Union County, as being responsible for preparing the award-winning popular annual financial reporting. It can only be awarded after the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting is given to the government entity for the same year. It's judged by an impartial panel to meet high standards of the program, including demonstrating creativity, reader appeal, understandability, distribution, and information presented. With the receipt of the PAFR award, Union County is the one of the only 4 government entities in North Carolina who have received all 3 GFOA awards in the same year. And with that, I understand that I get to present this to
Chris Alexander.
yes.
And Chris is accepting tonight on behalf of Finance. He is really the point person on the PAFR, and this is the first year Union County has done that. So, and Chris is also one of the impartial committee that does CAFR review for GFOA. So.
Chris, for you and your team's efforts, appreciate the award for outstanding achievement in popular and financial reporting. We were glad when you came. We appreciate everything that you and your peers do.
Thank you so much.
Keep Jeff. Keep me straight. Next, we want to have a public hearing for the Union County Unified Development Ordinance text changes. And Ms. Manager, if you would
Certainly,
Yes,
thank you,
Annette, please.
Chairman. If I could have Brian Matthews, our Growth Management Executive Director, come forward. Brian will just give you an overview of the changes that are being proposed this evening before you take any public input.
I'll wait on the screen to come down. Just going to talk about what we've got here. We adopted the Unified Development Ordinance back in October of 2014, and I explained to the board then that this is not a document etched in stone. It will change. It is not static. And here we are in front of you again several months later because of some items that we have identified within the ordinance that we feel need to be amended. For the most part, these are really more administrative functions, things that we've found that were either left out because they were previously in the ordinance and we didn't realize they were left out, or we found them that they were gaps in that they just weren't operating the way that we expected them to operate as far as the text goes. These are some changes we're recommending. The Planning Board did review these recommended changes on April the 7th. And they recommended that the board consider these for approval. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I will hit the highlights. I'll let you know that the main categories are, number one, we have changes to our residential cluster subdivision regulations. Most of these are things that were inadvertently left out, so we want to add those back in. I'll go over a few of those. Changes to our temporary dependent care regulations, and those relate to some changes to the general statutes. Also, changes to signage for residential districts as well as commercial districts. And then we have some addition of some classifications for right-of-way within the ordinance. So I'm going to go through a few of these changes. If there's anything that you'd like for me to highlight or anything that I missed, please don't hesitate to just stop me and we'll go from there.
And if I might, Brian, before you get started, just for the public's information, each one of the board members did receive a full briefing on all of the changes prior to the hearing this evening, so they have had a rather extensive briefing, much more so than probably what we're going to go over this evening.
Absolutely, and I can go in more detail, but I know you've got a lot going on here, but if you want me to go in more detail, please just let me know, and we'll go from there. One of the main points at the beginning here in Section 5 is that we didn't have a clear delineation that we only allow one principal dwelling on every piece of property. It was inferred, but it wasn't clear. In the previous ordinance, it was very clear, one principal dwelling on every piece of property. We've added language here just to indicate that not more than one principal dwelling is allowed on a residential piece of property. Now, that doesn't apply to developments that are townhomes or multi-unit developments. Those are approved with multiple buildings on them, so they don't apply for that. The next requirement here has to do with the residential cluster developments. Clustering is when you take a subdivision standard and you allow a residential subdivision to take the lot sizes and go from the standard lot size to a little bit smaller. They don't gain any density, they just gain smaller lot sizes. Part of the provisions that were inadvertently left out is that we had requirements for amenities to be added in for cluster development. So in order for you to get smaller lot sizes, some things you had to do that were on top of just dividing the property, you had to provide some amenities like walking trails, swimming pool, clubhouse, basketball courts. Any one of those amenities would serve the purpose. Unfortunately, that was left out. So we've added that language back in so it's clear that you would have to have at least one of those amenities in a residential cluster subdivision. Also, we've added the provision here that you have to have both central water and central sewer. Again, you're getting a benefit. You're allowed to do smaller lots. And in order to do that, you have to have both a central water and central sewer. Before it just said one or the other. You didn't have to have both. The next item is really more, we just had to change some of the article numbers. They were incorrect. Same thing on that page. The article numbers were incorrect. This page here where we're talking about Section 25, this is really more of a definition for governmental services. This came to light when we were going through our review of the sheriff's firing range. Essentially, there were some issues that may prevent the use of the firing range in the manner it was intended to be or in the future as far as using it. And it was recommended that we go back to the original definition that we had in our ordinance for how government uses are allowed for Union County. The language just says any government use by Union County, North Carolina, which is allowed for or required by law. All it does is says if the county is doing some function, then we have the purview to allow that function to occur. And it was not clear in the current ordinance. That's why we're recommending a change there. Okay, now we're getting to the section here, Section 30, which talks about dependent care, which are temporary. Dependent care they're intended to be a separate dwelling unit that is temporary in nature, allows for individuals to care for a family member on their own property for a temporary period. General statutes were changed under GS 153A 341.3, which gave specific standards for allowing dependent care on your property. The county cannot supersede that. That is a general statute. And so we've referenced that within our ordinance. But the county can add on top of that. We can have additional ways to provide dependent care residents, and we do that. And one of the ways that we've done that is in the past, we allowed manufactured homes or mobile homes to be used as dependent care facilities on a temporary basis. And we continued to keep that within the ordinance, but one thing we didn't specify are some standards for those manufactured homes and how they could be used. We've added the language back in here that you can have no more than one temporary dependent care dwelling on a piece of property, that it has to be a Class A, B, or C manufactured home, and that it has to be no larger than the square footage of the principal dwelling structure, and it must be in the rear of the property. Again, those are standards that were in the previous regulations. We're just bringing those forward in the current UDO. If I'm going too fast, just slow me down. Again, on the next section, which is section 35, this is actually talking about accessory dwelling units. These are permanent dwelling units that are allowed. Previous ordinance really was silent to that. We didn't allow accessory dwelling units on property, and we realized that that was problematic. There's a lot of times when the population needs a place for family members to live, whether it be an apartment over a garage or what fashion they may have. And so we wanted to have those standards with our ordinance, and we put them in there. However, we did miss a few things. Number one, we didn't have a size requirement in it. So we've requested that those units can be no greater than 50% of the size of the principal structure. And then also, we wanted to clarify that because it is permanent in nature, it cannot be a manufactured home. It has to be built to North Carolina Building Code. So for an accessory building or accessory dwelling unit, which is permanent, it has to be built to building code. Cannot be a manufactured home. Just want to make that clear. Let's see. All right. This one right here, section 40, it talks about exemptions. In the current UDO, we allow for exemptions for certain temporary kinds of uses, garage sale. It could be anything from, if you had a temporary event. We wanted to make it clear that the administrator of the UDO should have the ability to determine if there's something temporary in nature and make a decision on whether or not that requires a permit. Because the current regulations were specific and said yard sale, garage sale, and it didn't really leave the door open for the administrator to say, well, this event is temporary in nature, I'm going to allow it without a specific permit. And that's why we're requesting that language to be added to this. Now we're getting into the section that talks about signs. Again, we have sign requirements under residential zoning district as well as commercial zoning district. Specifically, this text change is removing language that would allow in a residential zoning district a sign to be up to 150 square feet. That's a large sign. It's not intended that we have that large a sign in a residential zoning district. We've asked to strike that language, limit it to 32 square feet. That's a 4x8 sign. That's more than large enough for a residential zoning area. And to go along with that, we've also asked for some standards for how those signs would be constructed, how far off the right-of-way they would have to be, how tall they can be. And then they also have to have landscaping around the base, and the base itself can be no less than 18 inches. So essentially, you put some standards in place for how the sign is actually constructed and where it can be constructed. Next section talks about signs which are in commercial districts. In this particular section, we noted that there was, we noted that in the Highway 74 area, which is predominantly highway corridor zoning district, we intended for signs to be allowed to be up to 25 feet in height. But the regulations specified the highway corridor zoning district. The problem we found is that we actually have property that is zoned highway corridor that is not on Highway 74. So those properties would be allowed to have a 25-foot tall sign, and that wasn't intended. We were intending for only the Highway 74 corridor to have those tall signs. What we've done here is ask for that language to specify just the Highway 74 corridor, regardless of the zoning classification. And in all other areas, the signs can be no taller than 12.5 feet. Again, just clarifying where that's allowed. The other part of this is we're establishing the location of where those signs can be, and they have to be measured from the current or the assumed right-of-way for the property. We're just clarifying that as well. Also, we're establishing a minimum height of the base for the sign. Landscaping was an item that we thought long and hard about in the regulations, and we put some standards in here for regulations for landscaping within the ordinance. We have a low profile screen, we have a high profile screen. Under both, what we found is we did not have a minimum width established for the screening. So while we said you had to have a certain number of plants, you had a certain number of trees, we didn't establish the width in which those had to be planted in. We had a situation where a developer was attempting to put the plantings within a very small area, about 3 feet. They can't survive in that small of an area. You need to have enough area for the roots to grow and the plants to thrive. We talked to our forester. We came up with at least a minimum standard that every landscaping buffer must have at least 10 feet in width in order to plant your trees, plant your shrubs. That's just good common practice for your plant material to survive. And we've established that for both your low profile as well as your high profile screens. They essentially say the same thing. You have to have 10 feet in area to put those landscaping in. All right, we go to the next one. All right, development standards. I talked about how we were adding language that was left out for our residential cluster developments, and a lot of these development standards have to do with residential cluster developments. And I want to specify a few things here. We used to have standards in our regulations for how trails were built, how street lights were installed, and how street trees were installed. And we intended for those types of developments to have street lights and street trees and trails, but the standards for how to build those were left out. So what we've gone back in and suggested that those standards be put back in, and those standards would apply to those particular developments. One of the other items that we also identified in this particular development standard section is that under a private driveway, you are required to have a maintenance agreement. So anyone who has a private driveway, they have multiple lots that access that private driveway, they have to have an agreement that says, you know, who's going to take care of it and how they're going to take care of it. The language basically indicated that our legal department had to actually agree to the form of those maintenance agreements. We're not in the business of making that decision. We're just there to say it has to be done. So we've asked to strike that language. They just have to provide a maintenance agreement and get it recorded. We do not review it for its content. Right of way. One of the items that we established here is sections of right of way specific to road classifications. And what we did not do when we were referring to our transportation plan is indicate what those right-of-way requirements are for the developments. And so what we've done is we've created a new table here that actually establishes the right-of-way requirements for new developments along state-maintained roads. So if you have a freeway, that right-of-way requirement is 350 feet, and half of that's 175. Major is 100 feet, minor is 70, and the other is 60. So each one of those is the total right-of-way. The projects that's on half of that right-of-way have to accommodate half of that, so 50 for a major, 35 for a minor, and 30 feet for a other. That just means that the project has to accommodate, dedicate, and provide for the right-of-way necessary for future widenings of those highways and roadways that are out there. One of the other items that we thought we wanted to make very clear is that in the ordinance we do refer to NCDOT standards for much of our road constructions and sidewalks and curb and gutter, but there are places where our regulations are on top of those standards. And we want to make it clear that it's NCDOT's requirements, or if our standards are within the ordinance, then our standards apply. You don't get to go one way or the other. You have to follow our standards if our standards are in there. One of the other items that we wanted to make sure was very clear too is about the provision of sidewalks. Obviously sidewalks are important as far as pedestrian connectivity in certain places, but they don't make sense where you have sidewalks to nowhere, honestly. So what we tried to do here is present some qualifications for when sidewalks need to be put in, and they really have to do when they're they're adjacent to certain types of development. Maybe it's a school, maybe it's a park. It's some reason for pedestrian connectivity, and therefore, at that point, the developer is either responsible for installing the sidewalk, or if for some reason there's a reason why the sidewalk cannot be reasonably installed, they have to provide an easement for the future construction of that right-of-way. So I want to make that clear. That was not necessarily clear in the ordinance. Also, as I said about trails, we've established the actual standards for installing a trail. And that came straight out of the ordinance that we had previously before we adopted this new UDO. There's really no changes to those standards as far as the trails go. Street trees, as I said before, we had some standards for street trees, really the separation between trees, how far off the right-of-way, and then we have in our ordinance the types of trees that we recommend that a developer should use when installing those street trees. Same thing for street lights. It's a separation between the street lights, a minimum separation, maximum, I'm sorry, a maximum height on the street lights, as well as the location of those street lights. The one thing that we did add that's a little bit different is we did add a section to create some ability to be flexible, where if for some reason the street light could be considered a nuisance to adjacent properties, we could have some flexibility to move those lights if we needed to. The intent is that we don't want to light up the world just because the street light standards say you have to have a street light every 300 feet. We want to be able to make some changes where it makes sense. That's the last section where it says D. It talks about the creative alternative solutions. All right. This is again also about sidewalks. This is really for commercial developments. When I talked about sidewalks before, that was for residential developments, but commercial developments need pedestrian connectivity too. And the same thing, when those have connections to schools, playgrounds, other pedestrian connectivity needs, we want to be able to require the developer to install those sidewalks, or if for some reason they cannot be installed, at least provide an easement, and this language actually does that for us. The stormwater section, this has to do with the language which was left in the ordinance, which would have required stormwater requirements for all developments within the county. That was not intended. We currently require stormwater best management practices for only cluster residential developments. This was intended to go back and change the fact that we do not want it for all developments, only for cluster developments. And removing that language would make it so that it goes back to the standard of just being for cluster developments. Again, same language there when it talks about prohibited runoff. That same language would apply just to cluster developments. We talk about the setbacks. One of the things that we did not have in our regulations are standards for how certain things can be installed in the setback. It is common for parking lots to be allowed in setbacks, but what we did not have is the maximum use of a setback. So currently, without the changes, someone could put a parking lot in the setback and there'd be nothing left of the setback but just parking lot. That wasn't intended. It was intended that you could use some of the setback, but not all of it. So we put a standard in there that they cannot encroach any more than 20 feet into the setback, as long as they can also meet their landscape buffer requirements. So if you've got a 30-foot required setback, they can go 20 feet into the setback with the parking lot. Then they've got an extra 10 feet for the landscaping requirements, so they meet the standards for that. Last but not least, it really talks about our definitions section. And when I talked about the provision of central water and central sewer, one of the things that we wanted to clarify under central water and central sewer is that central water and central sewer is really considered any of your public facilities that are provided by the county, a municipality, or other public utility, or they could be privately owned and maintained. So I want to make it clear that private utilities can also serve central water or central sewer. This language for central sewer is the same on the next page where it talks about central water. And that's the end of my discussion here as far as the text changes. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Brian?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. As for our public hearing, we had no one sign up for the public hearing. So a motion to close our public hearing. All in favor? Okay. Next, we have our informal comments. And this evening, each speaker must address the board from the lectern and begin their remarks by giving their name, stating whether they are residents of Union County, indicating the municipality within which they reside, if any, and stating the topic about which they intend to speak. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to make remarks. A speaker may not yield any of his or her time to another speaker. Speakers may not discuss matters which are subject to public hearings and must be courteous in their language and presentation. Restatements or repetitive comments by the same speaker, whether at the same or separate meetings, may be ruled out of order and terminated by the chair. Personal attacks will not be tolerated. Speakers may leave written comments and/or supporting documentation, if any, with the assistant county manager seated to your right. And first signed up tonight is Jerry Fitzgerald.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioners, good evening. Attorney Bundy. My name is Jerry Fitzgerald. I live at 1410 Willow Oaks Trail in Weddington, Union County. My home is in the Providence Volunteer Fire Department service area. The Providence Volunteer Fire Department has been in continuous operation for more than 60 years. During that time, this department has faithfully served and provided fire and rescue operation at superior level of service for the residents of Weddington and the neighboring areas. It has 7 fully equipped fire trucks and a staff of over 40 of the best trained and experienced firefighters in the region. The department is managed by a board that is exemplary in management and accountability, providing yearly audited statements of the department's operated financials. This department has earned the highest performance rating of any volunteer organization within the county, an ISO 4. The only department that has earned a higher rating is the Monroe Municipal Fire Department, and that's a full-time staff. The fire department is debt-free and should be the pride of Weddington, but today it is not. Weddington currently has a mayor and 2 council members that feel the department should be liquidated and the service transferred to the Wesley Chapel Volunteer Fire Department. This mayor feels this is the only way to solve a budget shortfall is to dissolve the fire department. Now, considering the outstanding service, experience, and value of the Providence Volunteer Fire Department, one would ask why not at least consider alternatives to a dissolution of the facility. Why? Why would you shut down the highest ISO-rated, debt-free, fully operational volunteer fire department that provides 24/7 service 365 days a year? Why? This speaker believes there is an agenda to this effort to close the fire department. It is my belief there is a hidden agenda perpetuated by the mayor, and the residents of Weddington are going to be the loss for this. I know for a fact management at the Wesley Chapel Volunteer Fire Department have made statements they can't wait for the day to come and escort our fine men and women out of the fire department. A personal vendetta is very obvious to me. Imagine terminating the positions of over 40 people, some of which have served the community at that fire department for over 3 decades. This is despicable. What we see happening in Weddington with regard to our fire department is the most grotesque abuse of public service imaginable. What compounds the insanity of this situation, the past council totally supported the fire department and provided almost $1 million for the firehouse renovations, and now 1 council later they want to shut it down. Help me, commissioners. What's this look like to you? In November, the mayor will be gone. I'm told the county commission cannot intervene in this issue, but I'm asking, if possible, help us find a way to keep this outstanding fire department operating and preserve the jobs of our fine men and women. Imagine lining up 40 of our people against the wall and terminating them for a superior job. That's what this mayor is trying to do, and we need help stopping it. I'm Jerry Fitzgerald. I live in Weddington. Attorney Bundy has my contact information. If you'd like to contact me and discuss it in depth, I'd sure like the opportunity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Petra Rains.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Petra Reiners, and I may not sound like it, but I have been a resident of Union County for the past 37 years, and I still speak funny. I live at 7309 Bailiwick Drive in Waxhaw, and I'd like to bend your ear for a moment on behalf of the Waxhaw Library. The library has been and still is in urgent need of expansion, and I think you're very well aware of that. At 2,770 square feet, the library is only a little bit larger than most of the average homes in our area are. Since it was built, the population in Waxhaw has increased from under 2,000 to, I understand, 13,800. And that does not include all the neighborhoods that have developed just outside the city limits. So our library offers a variety of wonderful programs, has a wonderful staff, but due to the lack of space, a lot of our citizens do not have the chance to attend these wonderful programs. And also due to the lack of space, library patrons are not able to benefit from the resources that are offered at other libraries, which include, and I think I gave you some supporting material here, free makerspace. It's an area devoted to creativity, like, you know, it has sewing machines, 3D printers, and other materials used to create. Free one-on-one job assistance, we cannot offer that. Free classes in new technology, tutoring and literacy skills, after-school summer programs, study rooms, cultural and educational programming, reference staff, variety of volunteer opportunities, and outdoor public space is not something that we can offer because we do not have the space available. For our children, there are no smart tables, there is no exploration and creative space, there is no tutoring available or homework helpers. Again, also for those, no after-school programming, no reading therapy with the dog program, and no children's staff. And like I said, these are things that are offered at other libraries. So I hope that in the future we can find a solution to this, even if it is just a temporary one, because the need is urgent, the need is now, and we would love to have a brand new library, but we know that is not feasible right now. If our library space could be doubled, I think it would greatly help the area and the citizens. So I hope you may consider that. And I personally like to thank you for keeping our libraries open during the economical downturn. I think we can be very proud that our commissioners saw to it. Other counties did not. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Val Grumlitz. Did I butcher that too bad?
Everybody does. My name is Valerie Gromlovitz, and I'm the representative from Waxhaw to the Union County Library Board of Trustees. And I've lived next to the library for 34 years, and I've seen a lot of changes in Waxhaw, but not a lot in the library. But we love our libraries, and we thank you, commissioners, for taking your part in making them what they are. The employees, the technology, the programs, everybody that comes to our libraries comments on all of that. So since Petra covered almost everything I had to say, I just want to again thank you for that and for the parking that we are getting now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next will be Eric Anderson.
Thank you. My name is Eric Anderson. I live in Weddington, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Providence Volunteer Fire Department. Also, on the water issue, which is an old budget thing, and actually I'll start off with that. A couple years ago, we had a tax assessor come to our farm because they were making sure that we were actually farming on our farm. And they wanted to take our irrigation ponds out of the farm use because they thought that we should use county water to irrigate crops with and feed livestock. That's, of course, we straightened that out, but when you're doing your planning, it would probably be smart, make sure that we encourage people to use alternative source of water for irrigation and for agricultural use instead of using drinking potable water for agricultural use, because that's just a waste. On the fire department, I know I came last meeting, and I just want to reiterate that this is a fight that's happening in Weddington. It's not pretty, it's not ugly. I know a lot of people are very upset about it. But what I don't want to see is a huge upheaval in the county fire plan where the Providence Volunteer Fire Department is dissolved, and then 8 months later, it gets pulled back. That doesn't help anybody, but I see that happening because I really don't see the current Weddington Town Council changing their course. But it would be nice to have consistency both for the residents of Weddington and for the residents of the rest of Union County to know what's going on and not just spending a lot of money switching back and forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. John Houston.
Members of the board, thank you very much for having us here this evening. My name is John Houston. I live at 1219 Willow Oaks Trail in Weddington, and I proudly serve as a member of the Board of Directors for Providence Volunteer Fire Department. Just a quick statement to let you know that the people who serve our community are probably the most dedicated people you would ever find. They are truly concerned about the safety of their community, and we have reduced this situation to a public safety issue. I understand and I realize that this board does not have the authority, nor do they wish to go ahead and do anything judicially or legislatively to address this problem. What I would ask that you do is to consider the public safety issue which is before us. It not only affects the Weddington residents, but also other residents and other areas in Union County. So I would ask very sincerely if you would consider the public safety issue along with everything else and put it in the forefront of your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Joe Dusson.
Good evening. My name is Joe DeSimone, and for the past 23 years, I've been a resident of Weddington, living in Willow Oaks subdivision at 1309 Willow Oaks Trail. Additionally, for the past 10 years, I've served on the board of directors of our homeowners association, currently in my third term as president. As you all are aware, several weeks ago, the mayor of Weddington, along with some council members, were able to push through an agenda and voted to cancel the FSA agreement with Providence VFD, and in 3 months, hand over the protection to Wesley Chapel. In 2012, the residents of Weddington fought the then council and won, keeping Providence VFD along with their 60-year tradition of providing superior fire and EMS protection for our town and all of Union County. This resulted in the formation of our municipal fire district, which was funded by the town. Now, 3 years later, against all the wishes of the residents, we are about to witness the loss of approximately 45 experienced and dedicated firemen. Excuse me. A department which was, as stated previously, has received a number 4 rating. Besides the loss of manpower, the county loses equipment capable of delivering 6,000 gallons of water to a fire. All the existing trucks, engines, tankers, which are owned by Providence, will disappear and not be put to use, saving lives and property. Every attempt by us to solicit agreement to slow down and follow the county's plan to investigate all aspects of fire service and come up with a blueprint that will benefit all of Union County has been summarily blocked by the mayor. He has continued to tout that this decision is strictly financial and that Providence can't support themselves. Providence submitted a balanced audited budget showing they could operate this year without any additional funding. The council rejected consideration of their proposal. When Councilwoman Pam Hadley brought representatives from the State Insurance Commission and Fire Marshal to address the residents at a town meeting recently, the mayor prevented them from speaking or making any public comments to the audience. They would have confirmed to the residents of Weddington that insurance rates would likely rise and the ratings of the fire department would likely change. Several of our residents are CPAs and went over the numbers which PFD makes public. None of the mayor's claims add up. We, the residents of Weddington, certainly understand what a difficult position this board has. Right when you have a plan to review all VFD funding with a desire to help all struggling VFDs, you are faced with the loss of Providence, which will make your task even more challenging. Some food for thought. None of us know by what method Wesley Chapel's fundings will come from. It's unknown how the county will be able to address replacing equipment or how the county can retain volunteers. I urge you to consider adopting a resolution to be delivered to the mayor and town council of Weddington that they continue contracting with the Providence VFD, frozen at the current level until June 2016, to allow Providence to be included in your county-wide fire service solution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mary Ann?
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Mary Ann DeSimone. I live at 1309 Willow Oaks Trail, Weddington, Union County. Thank you for allowing time for public comment on a subject dear to the hearts of the residents of Weddington. Our mayor, along with 2 members of the Weddington Town Council, have made a decision to dissolve a fire department which has served our community faithfully for 60 years. This decision was made in a 3-month time period without the benefit of public input or discussion. This decision to terminate a contract with Providence Volunteer Fire Department and enter into a new contract with Wesley Chapel VFD is an injustice to the residents of Weddington. You, the Board of County Commissioners, just last month voted unanimously to delay changing the county model of fire service. You decided to listen to the community by creating an impact study group to investigate and discuss all aspects of fire service in Union County. Then, after all the facts are presented to you, to bring those recommendations back to you in January 2016 and implement a plan to go into effect in July 2016. Are we, the residents of Weddington, not entitled to the same consideration? The mayor of Weddington and the majority of the town council won't even consider agreeing to the same action, but instead is moving forward without listening to the cries of his constituents. And in 3 months, Providence VFD will no longer exist. This selfish action by the mayor will cause irreparable damage to the fire service currently being provided to the residents of Weddington, and at the same time, increase your burden to provide sufficient fire service to all of Western Union County. It is a fact that when a fire call comes into the dispatch center, 2 separate fire departments are called into service to respond to that location. If Providence VFD is eliminated and Wesley Chapel is the sole provider of service for the entire town, where will that other department come from? Stallings, Mineral Springs, Bakers, Waxhaw? These other departments might be up to 10 miles away from a house in Weddington. thereby taking them even further away from their home station. I respectfully request that this Board of County Commissioners exert whatever influence that is available to you to stop this runaway train before it's too late. Please remember the fact that in 3 months, approximately 45 dedicated and experienced firefighters and EMT will no longer have a home. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Barbara Arps. I called it Epps last time.
Hi, my name is Barbara Earps, and I'm a resident of Union County. I'm here to support the development of a library for Waxhaw. Waxhaw today had a meeting for the input of their citizens, and of course many things were talked about: transportation, infrastructure, historic preservation. But one of the things that was on everybody's mind was cultural growth. And that would include a library for the citizens of Waxhaw. And you have heard, you know, it would just be wonderful because Waxhaw has grown, but I see, I didn't know it was there for 35 years. So Waxhaw has grown, but where has the growth of the library been? And we are hoping, all of us that support this, that you would consider doing something for the town of Waxhaw and help the citizens out with a bigger, better library. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Andrew Moore.
Good evening. Andrew Moore, Providence Woods, Weddington. A little bit of history line, bullet points as to situation with Providence Volunteer Fire Department. Municipality was formed 2 years ago in Weddington with the county and the state support and approval. Approximately $900,000 was spent on updating the fire station, Weddington taxpayer dollars. Providence Volunteer Fire Department enters into a contract with the town of Weddington for 10 years in an FSA contract for 10 years. PVFD receives an ISO rating of a 4 approximately 3 to 6 months ago. April 2015, Town Council, excluding Pam Hadley, voted to cancel 10-year contract just signed August 2014. Canceling this contract not only jeopardizes the fire service for Weddington, but it also jeopardizes fire service for Stallings, rural Weddington, and southern Mecklenburg based on the existing contracts in place. Also, if Wesley Chapel were to take over and step in or provide service, it would certainly thin out their resources, and it could reduce their fire rating and jeopardize the safety of their citizens. Also, a $750,000 penalty will have to be paid by the town of Weddington due to a contract breach. Again, taxpayers' money. I've spoke to Commissioner Goodwin on several events, several times pertaining to this, and he cannot assure that the premiums will not go up. He can't assure that they won't go up or they will go up. The commissioner clearly states that if there is some sort of change in service, that there will not be enough time to have an inspection in order to determine whether the service stays the same or goes up. Mayor Dieter does not agree. Mayor Dieter says premiums will not go up, guaranteed. Stated in public that if they would go up, he'd look into other alternatives. The mayor does not have a fire safety or fire marshal background, and yet he is making statements that are simply not true. The fire marshal says the opposite. I would side with Commissioner Goodwin based on his experience, background, and current position. Why is Weddington in such a hurry? Why isn't Weddington speaking to parties involved to resolve this issue? Why is the first-term mayor saying that premiums will not go up? Again, Mayor Dieter's background is not fire service versus the commissioner and his staff. Why can't Weddington pull back the reins and implement the plan the county is implementing? Planning, researching, pricing, coming up with a solution that is in the best interest and safety of the citizens over a period of time, 3, 6, 9 months, and implement accordingly. Thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you, sir. And that concludes the list signed up for public comments. Next, we have additions, deletions, and/or adopting the agenda. Any comments? Commissioner Akins?
I'd like to add a resolution to be deliberated and a resolution to be deliberated and considered by this board on the regular agenda.
Okay. We will make that item 9, excuse me, 8A. And I'd like to, is that all, Commissioner? Yep. Okay. Also, I'd like to add a 4A, which is a Weddington Fire Service statement.
Can you repeat what you're adding?
What I'm adding is a Weddington Fire Service statement.
Where at? I guess that's what
4A.
4A.
Completely after, right after this.
Okay.
Any additions? Is there a motion
Motion to approve is amended.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, none. Item 4A, the Weddington Fire Service statement. It is our understanding that on Tuesday, April 28, 2015, the town of Weddington took action to terminate its fire suppression service contract with Providence Volunteer Fire Department, effective July 29, 2015, and then took further action to contract with Wesley Chapel Volunteer Fire Department for fire suppression service within the municipal limits of the town of Weddington. Members of the Union County Board of Commissioners have been contacted by concerned citizens regarding the impact of the town's actions on fire protection, first responder services, and insurance rate. Several citizens have asked the Board of Commissioners to take some action regarding this matter. However, it should be understood that this is an issue within the control of the town of Weddington, not the Union County Board of Commissioners. In order for the Board of Commissioners to include territory within the municipal limits in a county fire funding district, by law, it must have approval of the municipality's governing board for such inclusion. The town has decided instead to provide fire protection services to its citizens through a municipal fire service model utilizing fire suppression agreements. Union County lacks the legal authority to control the method of fire protection services within the town of Weddington. Even so, I have worked to minimize the impact caused by the actions of the town to the extent within my ability. This has included facilitating communications between the State Fire Insurance Commissioner, State Fire Marshal, the Mayor, and the fire chiefs in an effort to smooth any transition and to seek for all our citizens the best fire and medical coverage. Thank you. Item number 5, the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve. Any discussion? All in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, none. Old business. Boy, I had you quick. And it's Union County Water Use Ordinance and Water Shortage Response Plan. Ms. Manager, if you'll.
Yes, Mr. BOCC and his staff have been working on this plan probably for about the last 2 years. We did a briefing to the Board of County Commissioners in November of 2014. Since that point in time, we have been finalizing the ordinance. We did brief the 2 incoming commissioners who were not here in November so that they were aware of the plan. And so I will turn it over to Ed to give you some background as to the direction we are seeking this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Manager, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Just also, we did also conduct another workshop with the board, which is not an official workshop because we did not have a quorum, but it was televised, so our citizens had another opportunity to see that. The plan and the draft ordinance have been on the county website for about the last 25 days, so there's additional information out there. Again, as stated earlier, we've had two hour-long workshops with the board, hour-and-a-half-long workshops where we went through a very detailed presentation. Those are available online, and what I'm going to do tonight is give you a more abbreviated version of that presentation, try to keep it to 15, 20 minutes or so for the benefit of the audience, so they can, if they haven't seen previous versions of this, and again, it's online on the county website. We have a couple of objectives in this program in terms of establishing a new water shortage response plan and the associated ordinance. First and foremost is to establish a long-term demand management strategies or water conservation strategies that are separate and distinct from how we respond to shortages or drought. The second is to create a plan that gives us tools to effectively deal with water shortages that result from either drought, capacity limitations if we don't have enough capacity in our facilities, or system emergencies. And third is to also make sure that our program complies with state regulations and the Duke Energy low and flow protocols on the Catawba River. The existing water conservation ordinance has been in place for over 20 years and has been amended numerous times during that time period in response to drought, in response to capacity issues, and in response to legislative mandates. The existing ordinance does not address long-term demand management strategies. Even though it's called a water conservation ordinance, the existing ordinance really deals with drought and how we deal with responses to drought conditions. And because it has been amended so many times, it's just a difficult ordinance to navigate and work through. And there are some aspects of it that are not in conformance with the Catawba River low and flow protocol and state guidelines. So there's a real need to update the ordinance and have it comply. First thing we want to talk about is demand management strategies. What is it and why do we need to do this? Demand management strategies are practices and policies that we put in place to reduce water consumption and promote efficient use of water resources. The four basic elements that we use to accomplish this is one is our rate structure. We have what's termed an inclining block rate structure, that the more you use, the higher rate you pay. And our rates are actually broken into 4 different tiers, and each tier has a higher rate associated with it, again, to promote conservation and to make people aware that this is an expensive resource. Second element is irrigation restrictions. We've had restrictions in place since 2009 that limit irrigation to 2 days per week. Building codes and industry have done a lot to promote conservation through water efficient appliances and fixtures. And we've seen a general trend in the last 20 years in reducing water consumption. The low flow fixtures you have in your house now, and sinks, toilets, the appliances for dishwashers and clothing are much more water efficient than they were. And the last element is public education, where we need to keep our residents aware of the issues of water conservation and efficient use of that resource. Why do we need to do this? First and foremost, what's not stated here, this is just good policy and good practice, that water is a limited resource. We certainly realized that here in 2002 and 2007 when we had significant droughts. There is no more water being made. The water we have is the water that we have to work with. Beyond that, it makes good economic sense. We have to build our facilities to meet that peak day demand. So our water treatment plants, our major water pipelines and distribution lines are all sized to meet our peak demands of our customers. Reducing that peak demand saves us a lot of money. If we don't have to build as big of a treatment plant because we can reduce that peak, we save a lot of dollars in our capital and in our operating expense. In our master plan that this board adopted, we reflected reducing our peak demand from historical highs of 2007 and 8 down to a more traditional level that you see in this part of the world. In 2007, 2008, our peak day was more than 2 times our average day in terms of demand. So we were building twice the capacity that we need for the average day to meet those few peak days. Last and certainly not least, we're in the process right now of permitting a new water treatment plant off the Yadkin River. One of the things regulatory agencies will be looking to as part of our permit application, as part of the environmental impact analysis, is us demonstrating to the regulatory community that we are efficient and good stewards of that water resource, that we're using water efficiently, we're using it wisely, and we have these policies and practices in place. So the water shortage response plans addresses conservation by essentially establishing a new norm for irrigation. As I mentioned earlier, irrigation restrictions have been in place since 2007. Additionally, in response to drought since 2009, we have kept those restrictions in place even though we were out of drought in response to capacity needs and to manage that demand. And we've been in what is titled a modified stage 2 under our old regulations. What we're proposing in this ordinance and in this plan is that the board establish as a minimum, as a baseline condition during periods of normal rainfall and when we're not in a drought and there's not an emergency, that we would limit irrigation to 3 days per week. And that is a relaxing of the standard we're in right now, where right now we're in a standard of 2 days per week. So we're relaxing it up to 3, but it's still a very conservative step. It's a message that this board is sending to the community that water conservation is an important issue, that we need to limit the use of the resource to what is needed. And taking this step will accomplish that message. We've worked with our friends and colleagues in the Agricultural Extension Office to look at, is this sufficient to maintain lawns and maintain irrigable areas for our customers? And what they've told us is the rule of thumb of 1 inch per week for lawn maintenance is more than adequate. And with this 1 inch per week, we can easily achieve that within 3 days per week and spreading that irrigation across our customer base. What we also recognize, though, is that we need to provide more education to our customers on the best ways to irrigate. The time of day, how much to irrigate at any given time, when to irrigate and when not to. Part of the problem we had back in the drought, people's lawns burnt out as the drought progressed, and people would still pour water on those lawns trying to keep them alive even though they're browned out and they're not coming back till it cools off. So we need to educate our citizens and our customers on good practice. Again, we would be in the leading edge of implementing this kind of a irrigation restriction. There are only a half dozen other communities in the state that have adopted this level of conservation, and 5 of those did that voluntarily, and one, Concord and Kannapolis, was driven by regulatory agencies as part of their permitting for their interbasin transfer. So our proposal to the board as part of this ordinance is that the way we'll continue to manage our long-term demand is by establishing this 3-day per week irrigation as our normal condition, continue with our inclining block rate structure that is in place today, and enhance our public information and education efforts in water conservation. So that was the demand side. That's the ongoing water conservation that we need to have, believe we need to have in place. The second element of this is how do we respond when we're in periods of shortage, when there's a drought, system emergency, or other problems or other issues that create a scarcity. The water shortage response plan addresses, again, drought, capacity limitations meaning where our current demand, our use by our customers, is approaching the capacity of our treatment facilities. And what do we do in a system emergency? If there's a catastrophe at a treatment plant that limits our ability to produce, if there's a major contamination spill, excuse me, that would require us to take actions. The protocols that are in place right now is we have a Catawba River low inflow protocol that prescribes what we need to do during drought. And this is in place because we are signatories to the Duke relicensing program, and along with 18 other jurisdictions that all signed off on the Duke relicensing. And as part of the Duke relicensing agreement, we created a series of protocols to say what we would do during a drought situation and how would we conserve. So by contract, we have agreed to implement those protocols. The plan also needs to address what happens if our demand approaches the plant capacity. And again, we need to have better authorities to impose restrictions in system emergencies. As I mentioned, during the drought, we're required to comply with state regulations and the low inflow protocol. The last point here is the signature of the Duke relicensing. We are members of the Catawba Water Management Group that established these protocols. The primary focus of the water shortage response plan, and the plan goes into a lot of detail on this that I'm not covering here, and welcome the citizens to look at that on our website. But the low inflow protocol that's established by the Catawba Water Management Group defines 5 different levels of drought within the Catawba Basin. And it's based on 3 factors. It's based upon lake levels, the reservoirs that we're pulling our water from, the U.S. Drought Monitor Index that tells us the severity of the drought, the climate, and the weather we're dealing with, and stream flows, how much water is coming into those reservoirs. Duke, by agreement, has the authority to declare the stage of drought we're in and the recovery from those stages based upon very specific parameters. The protocol describes how the stakeholders will implement water use restrictions to progressive stages of drought, and each drought stage is progressive upon the one previous. Now, existing ordinance had a few discrepancies with the low inflow protocol that we're correcting as part of this new ordinance, and I'll go through those. This is just a quick overview of the low inflow protocol, measurable indicators that are used to determine drought stages. And I just put this up here so our citizens know this is not an arbitrary determination by someone sitting in an ivory tower in Duke. There's very prescribed indices that they're looking at in terms of the amount of water in the reservoirs. The U.S. Drought Index is something that comes from the federal government, and the stream gauges are actually physical measurements. So we're looking at very discrete parameters, and depending on what those discrete parameters are, making a determination of which stage of drought we're in. They're categorized as a watch, meaning, okay, we're not in a drought, but we need to be keeping our eyes open. Moderate, which would be a stage 1. Severe at stage 3. Extreme, severe at stage 2. Severe, extreme at stage 3, and exceptional at stage 4. I would tell you that California is in a straight 4 drought right now, and is that extreme. We were in a stage 3 drought during 2007. This table summarizes the changes in our response to the irrigation portion of our response from the existing ordinance to the low inflow protocol and then the proposed ordinance. And you can see most of what's highlighted in bold in the proposed are the only changes. And you can see at the normal or stage 0, current ordinance didn't speak to it. There was no restrictions. The low inflow protocol did not require any restrictions. But we are proposing, again, as part of our demand management strategies, that during our normal situation, we would have mandatory 3-day irrigation. If we go to stage 1, it's voluntary. We're voluntarily requesting people to conserve more and suggesting that they reduce their irrigation no more than 2 days per week. At stage 2, we increase that to mandatory 2 days, which is consistent with our existing ordinance. At stage 3, which again is getting into an extreme drought, we're clarifying that it is mandatory to go to 1 day or less, where the previous ordinance said mandatory 2 days or less. So we're making that mandatory 1 day or less, which is consistent with the low inflow protocols that we're signatory to. And at stage 4, we're basically out of water. We're in dire straits, and we're saying you can't irrigate anymore. The water shortage response plan also has a set of parameters and protocols that we've established to determine when we're getting near the capacity of our facilities and what actions we would take. And the actions we would take would be the same as prescribed in this slide for stage 1 through 4. So when you see these stages 1 through 4 in this slide, our response would be the same. The existing ordinance had some parameters in there, but they weren't well defined, and we've tried to tighten up those definitions here. Where before in stage 1 we had a sustained demand of 80% of capacity, said sustain really is not a well-defined term for a regulatory issue like this. We're replacing that with a demand of greater than 80% of the available capacity for an average of 7-day period. Likewise, for stage 2 and stage 3, we've better defined those demands. We've also likewise better defined how we get out of those demands, and it's based upon a prescribed period of time that we would go with without being in that condition. The third thing we changed as part of the water shortage response plan was how do we deal with emergencies? And the existing ordinance really didn't speak to this at all except for system maintenance, and said during system maintenance we could impose stage 2. And we said we really need to envision the potential of a major problem, major curtailment of capacity, and have an ability to deal with it. You know, a real life example is what happened in West Virginia last year, where there was a major contaminant spill into the river, which contaminated their water plant, and they had to take very drastic action very quickly. So the proposed water shortage response plan and ordinance allows the Public Works Executive Director to determine that an emergency condition exists that warrants a water shortage stage. I would then make that recommendation to the county manager, and the county manager would have the authority then to declare that stage of drought and then advise the board. The declare stage can be modified or resolved as additional information becomes available. And we do this and ask that that authority be vested in the manager because of the urgency of an emergency situation and the inability to come back and schedule a board meeting in that kind of a timely response period that would be needed. In terms of implementing this policy, the ordinance and the plan would go into effect upon adoption of the board. Our plan is to keep the basic method for scheduling irrigation days that we have in place right now. Right now we have the county broken into 10 different zones. These are our billing cycles that we actually use for billing our customers. And our intent is to keep that format in place. So right now, if you're in a particular zone and irrigating 2 days per week, our plan is to keep the same basic 2 days per week and add 1 day to that. This slide actually walks through and shows what the existing 2 days per week are and what the new 3 day per week schedule would be. In most cases, except for billing cycle 1 and 10, we're simply adding a day to the schedule. And in cycle 1 and 10, to get everything to balance, we had to shift it around a little bit, so we changed 1 day, added 1 day. But we think in terms of public education and communication, keeping the program as similar to what people are using now, that they become accustomed to and are self-enforcing with their neighbors is the easiest way to go and the easiest way for us to administer. The enforcement provisions in the ordinance are the same as the existing ordinance, so we're not proposing any changes to the procedures for enforcement on the regulation. We are proposing a change to the civil penalties, and some of this came from the Board of County Commissioners back in our November board meeting, November workshop. Currently, regardless of what stage of drought we're in, if you're violating the ordinance, the penalties are the same regardless of stage, and it's a warning at the first violation, and then for your second, third, and progressive violations, that penalty goes up. The new ordinance proposes that if we are in a higher stage of drought, the penalties would be higher and more immediate and would grow faster. And the table below is what's reflected in the new ordinance. Up to and including and for a fourth violation at any stage, we would shut off your water, and you would no longer have a right to use county water until you cleared all these violations and cleared the penalties. So to summarize, what we're asking the board to do is formalize our long-term demand management strategies by establishing a maximum 3 day per week irrigation schedule as our normal condition. Create a comprehensive plan to respond to multiple water shortage conditions at various levels of severity. This new plan and ordinance will put us in compliance with state regulations and the low inflow protocols of the Catawba River water management group. And we recognize that we also need to move forward and provide better education on irrigation schedules, water restrictions, water use efficiencies to our customers to better implement a long-term plan. And with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions the board might have.
Questions for Mr. Gusecki?
You'd like to make a motion?
Well, in the original proposal, I think that we had discussed, you had mentioned pressure washing and that. I don't see that in here. That's been taken off?
I've took that off the presentation. It's obviously all still on the plan. Just for the sake of brevity tonight, I didn't go through all of the details other than irrigation restrictions. But for the benefit of the public, we do have a whole series of other restrictions that take place at each stage. That say, at stage 2, you can no longer water your, you can no longer wash your car, or at stage 3, we recommend restaurants stop serving water. At stage 2, you can't export water out of the county anymore. So there are a series of other restrictions we put in place. A lot of them are for public education purpose and awareness purpose. Some of them are for actually water conservation purposes.
But during a normal stage 0, they could pressure wash all that anytime during the week?
Anytime, anywhere.
Okay.
And even stage 1 is voluntary. It's please don't. At stage 2 is when we start saying, don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rushing.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the Union County Water Use Ordinance and Water Shortage Response Plan.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Jerry Simpson.
I'd just like to thank Ed, you and your staff for all the work on this. And I know I heard you mention the other day a study that had been done on the Catawba River basin here in the area. And the good news was that we weren't going to run out of water in 30 years. We were only going to run out in 50 years. So I think it's important and behooves Union County to be proactive in this area and work as diligently as possible to conserve our water.
Any further comments? All in favor of the motion to adopt the Union County Water Use Ordinance and Water Shortage Response Plan?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Thank you, Ed. Under our new business, item 7, legislative coordination. Ms. Manager, if you'd like to.
Yes, I'd like to make some introductory comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Probably over the last year plus, I have had some informal discussions with board members as to how we can better communicate with our General Assembly and have a better handle as to legislative issues that could in fact affect Union County as well as other counties within the state. I have mentioned to you that I think that we need to have a more comprehensive approach than we have presently, as well as a more structured approach than we have had in the past. With the addition of Michelle Lancaster as our new Assistant County Manager, she has expertise as well as experience within this area. So I thought it was an appropriate time to bring this forward for the board's consideration. So with that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, County Manager Cotto. Chairman Helms and board members, tonight I'm here to ask for 2 things from the board that are laid out for you in your agenda package. The first is that you would endorse the concept of a comprehensive legislative strategy that includes local and state activities, and that you would also authorize the county manager to retain a lobbyist to represent Union County's interests in Raleigh. This strategy is a deliberate approach to building relationships at the local and state levels. This ties very strongly to your strategic plan focus area of community consensus that talks about developing relationships based upon mutual trust and understanding, engaging appropriate stakeholders to identify and successfully implement programs and initiatives that reflect community priorities. As I previously said, the first component of tonight's request is the endorsement of a concept that is a comprehensive strategy for the effective management of legislative matters. This strategy has 2 parts. First, at the local level and working with the municipalities, and second, at the state level with the Union County delegation and other legislative members, as well as state agency officials. At the local level, I'm initiating contact with representatives of the municipalities, Particularly, I've started with 5, Wingate, Marvin, Wesley Chapel, Mineral Springs, and Indian Trail, based on issues and projects that are ripe for discussion with those communities. With this contact, I will talk with the municipal representatives about what they would like to see from the county in terms of our relationship, and we'll work to tailor our ongoing approach to what works best for each unique municipality. Additionally, I've identified in my 3 weeks tomorrow, about 24 items that are in process or are relevant for partnership with municipalities. Examples of these are the Park and Recreation Master Plan, solid waste service issues, and economic development opportunities that may exist in partnership with all the municipalities. This is a focus developed on developing a deliberate strategy on how we can work together to represent all Union County residents. At the state level, I have started making contact with the offices of the 5 Union County delegation members and have a visit planned to Raleigh next week. This is simply for introduction purposes at this time to see if they have any feedback that will be useful as we move forward with a more measured approach on how we work collaboratively with the delegation members. The big item that we're seeking support for tonight is the authorization for the county manager to retain a lobbyist to represent Union County's interest in Raleigh. Currently, 32 local governments have lobbyists in Raleigh. 12 of those are counties. In the facts that I would like to lay out about the lobbyist activities and what we would be looking for is someone in Raleigh to track activity on a daily basis, someone who has expertise in general government with a particular expertise in public utilities, because that's a big part of what happens here in Union County. And if the board authorizes staff to move forward with identifying a firm, we will bring that back to you for formal action on the actual engagement and contract details. I'm confident, based on the research that I've done in my experience, that this will be less than the manager's $100,000 contractual authority that she has. And again, we would be bringing that back for you to authorize. Additionally, at the state level, I believe we need to identify all statewide professional organizations that the county has relationships with and establish a more thorough process to coordinate our legislative efforts. For example, we have the State Association of Counties, the North Carolina Tax Assessors Association, the DSS Directors Association, the Association of Local Health Departments, and there are numerous others. And the longer-term approach to this overall strategy involves identifying priorities and guidelines based on feedback from staff and you as the board, with a goal to safeguard Union County and its residents from legislation that could have negative impacts. This will involve a structured process to make the local delegation aware of the priorities of Union County. I would also just like to mention to you just where we are in the legislative process currently with the General Assembly. As most of you know, they're in the midst of their long session. And last week, crossover actually occurred with 343 House bills that made it through and 164 Senate bills. So there's quite a lot to keep our eyes on. Over the next few months, we'll be bringing more information to you to take additional action. And tonight, I'm simply asking for the endorsement of these 2 items, and I'm happy to take questions.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Lancaster, is this the exception or the rule with regard to North Carolina counties? Would you happen to have an idea?
There are 12 counties that have representatives in Raleigh currently. So is it the exception? There's 100 counties, so this is not the majority.
Sure.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman?
Oh, thank you. You know, we talked about this in our meeting for the agenda, and since that time, the day before, I guess, was a bad day for Union County because we had a lobbyist in Raleigh that had put out some false statements about something that we and many other counties had done. And after thinking about that and thinking about hiring a lobbyist, what will this lobbyist be pushing for? Will he be pushing for a unanimous position? Will he, what if I like it and Lance likes it, but the other 3 commissioners don't like it? And that's a concern that I have is what will this lobbyist be pushing for when he's not? We don't have much time to direct him to push anything. I understand that the need, especially for lobbyists for the water and sewer, making sure that we're kept up to date on those issues. But at the same time, don't really know that I'm ready to sign over my desires or to a lobbyist to make statements for me in Raleigh. What he may be advocating for He may feel it's the right thing, but the folks back here at home may think opposite, so how do I get a say in that? So I'm not going to vote for this tonight. I didn't want to make a motion on it because I'm maybe the only one that votes against it. But I've seen the damage that a lobbyist can do in just a day's time, so I don't want to get really involved in that. Maybe this is something we could discuss. Maybe we look at the issues legislatively, maybe that you bring us a few and we start looking at them, and maybe we understand the need for a lobbyist and what that person would do. I'm just not ready to support it just now.
If I can, Vice Chair Rushing, the lobbyist does not run amok, I guess is the best way to put it, is part of the process, and having worked in other counties where we did in fact have lobbyists, the legislative program is very well defined, and it's defined by the Board of County Commissioners. So the lobbyist is aware of what issues you are wanting to keep your eye on and wanting to be apprised of so that we can provide feedback. Typically, you also established a legislative agenda of items that you feel very strongly about that you would like to promote in Raleigh. So it is not we set them loose to do what they think is best. It is guided very much by the Board of County Commissioners and staff.
And that's why I feel we can guide it from this board here just as good as we can. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just not ready to support it right now.
Michelle, I'd have to say that I've been very impressed in your 3 weeks that you've been here and your knowledge. One of my concerns is we have very minimal contact with our 5 representatives in Raleigh today. And this is kind of like jumping from we're not doing anything to going full bore. I know I had the pleasure of presenting to the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners a concern we had. And we were able to sell this lobbying group that it was one of their top 3 items that wanted to address. I have to agree with Commissioner Rushing. I think we're moving faster. I'd like to see us enhance our communication with our legislative group. Frankly, I hear from one fairly regularly and nothing from the rest of them. And so establishing processes where we communicate with our legislators. If anybody would know what's going on in Raleigh that would affect their county, I hope our elected legislators would understand that. So I have to agree with Mr. Rushing that I think we need take steps to address this concern. We can take interim steps. Plus, it's a time that we just came through a budget meeting just a minute ago and talking about having to raise taxes. So, spending another $100,000, I'm a little hesitant. But I do appreciate what you're doing, and you've been very impressive in your knowledge of this. And I'm probably dependent on some of that, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Any further?
As a point of clarification, Chairman, what was that bill that you talked about with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners?
It was the one that Board of Education not sue Board of County Commissioners.
Okay. Ms. Lancaster, wasn't that taken up last week in Raleigh?
It was.
And how did that come out?
It was not successful. I think it failed 66 to 52.
And were there any Union County delegates that voted against that?
Yes, there were.
And who were they?
I can tell you who didn't vote against it. How about that?
All right.
Representative Horn did not vote against that measure, I believe. And the others, ARP voted against it, and I'm not going to get his name right now. Brody, yes.
So Brody voted for it?
He voted against that. The bill was about the ability for a school board to sue the county to eliminate that ability, so he voted against that.
Not sure, but I think it was the other way around. I think Representative Brody voted in favor, Representative Arp and Horn voted against it.
Okay.
I think you're
Stand
correct,
corrected.
Commissioner.
Okay.
I stand corrected.
All right, no
I
problem.
haven't got all my names down.
It's quite
exactly.
all right. 3 weeks on the job, it's kind of a trick question. But anyway, that is the reason that I support the legislative lobbyist in Raleigh. Exactly to that point. You lobbied a group of very powerful individuals and were successful in getting that on the agenda. And doggone it, we had 2 of our own that voted against it.
Well,
I say we need better communication with Raleigh. They clearly aren't getting the message from what the people here in Union County want. So I say vote for it, and let's put somebody up in Raleigh to let those people know what we're talking about.
And I agree with a lot of what you say, Commissioner. I just think we should start speaking with our own legislators.
We
better.
tried that, Commissioner, and it failed miserably. I call the question.
Commissioner.
There's not been a motion yet, so I want to discuss a little bit more.
Go right ahead.
I know what you're saying, and the need for a lobbyist, and the need for our legislators to listen to us and work with us better is there. But you know, like I said, we had a lobbyist that works for a few of the counties out in the eastern part of the state. Again, that had the whole state in uproar over who was for what and what was for who, and it was just a big mess. And you know, if we can't convince our own legislators to do something that's right for the county, I doubt some lobbyist is going to be doing it either. I don't know.
I think you improve your chances.
Well, we have the State Association of County Commissioners. I agree. What we're doing is not working, so maybe we need to work harder on communicating and with our legislators as a board and sending a clear message. Dean Art, for example, spoke to me last Friday, and he thought we were against that we had actually voted on a bill to support or not support a bill that we'd never even discussed. And in talking to him and conveying that we had not taken any action on it, he was actually going to vote against it because he heard through the grapevine we had voted against it. So that is a problem, and that's something that maybe, you know, I think that you've done.
Just keep making my point, Commissioner.
I do have a meeting scheduled with Representative Arp next week. One of the things that I would point out, in addition to what the county manager mentioned, and I think this goes to Commissioner Akmus's point to some degree, is a lot of what a representative can do for you in Raleigh is, frankly, the timeliness factor is incredibly important. None of us could get in our car and drive there quick enough to attend committee meetings when, I mean, they're happening very quickly. Sometimes the schedule changes from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. And also, while I also mentioned it's not just about your local delegation, but there are other legislators that are introducing legislation all the time that have no intent to do anything to harm any county, or it may be a particular county, but not Union County. And to have someone there who can alert us when those things happen, a lot of what you have to do in the General Assembly is frankly play an offense. And it's not the defensive reactive strategy all the time. That's probably actually the limited amount of what you're doing. Because you do want your representatives to know what's important to you. And what I would propose that we are doing would be putting together a process that we would bring to you for you to have all say so and what happens from a policy standpoint. But really knowing, as I mentioned the numbers, 343 bills, the likelihood that there's something there that could have an impact is pretty high. The likelihood that I'm going to know every word, that the attorney's going to know, that other people are going to know, it becomes increasingly difficult, I think, going forward. It's just a very complex system to work through, and I think that's part of the issue is the volume.
Okay. And we're sending us more of a public works type problem than anything else? Or?
No, I think that would be it. Frankly, the list of bills that I've gotten to look for are from a public utility standpoint. The tax assessor had a list of between 50 and 20 bills, 15 and 20 that he wanted me to keep a look at. So I think it kind of runs the gamut. But yes, I think in the business, the public utilities business is very important to this community. And so that's the piece too. It's not just about the legislative members, but also senior agency officials and how you build those relationships. And I've seen firms be very effective in helping communities work through issues from that standpoint.
Commissioner Jerry Simpson, I think you had.
I'll just reemphasize your point about the number of bills. It is becoming much more complex, the legislature certainly is than it was years ago. And with the projects that we have coming up, like Norwood and things like that, I think it behooves us to move in that direction. I see that the action requested says to endorse the concept of a comprehensive approach to facilitate legislative coordination. There may have been mistakes made on our part with our state legislators of not communicating, and vice versa. So I think it is important that we, and I understand, and we're not voting tonight on how much money is going to be spent or the money to spend. We're simply moving in the direction of a lobbyist approach and endorsing that concept of a comprehensive approach to facilitate that legislative coordination. So I will make that motion that we endorse the concept of a comprehensive approach to facilitate legislative coordination, and at the same time authorize the manager to retain a lobbyist to represent Union County's interest in Raleigh pending legal review. Now, let me clarify. Did I understand we're not approving the funding with this motion as it is written?
No,
Is
sir.
that correct?
We would bring the contract back to the Board of County Commissioners for final authorization.
And pending legal review, and acknowledge the county manager's exemption of this service from the RFP process.
Commissioner Higgins.
Chairman Helms, you made a comment earlier that I'm going to go back to, and you spoke about the budget meeting that we just went through.
Yes,
and how
sir.
we talked about potential having to raise taxes. I want to remind the chairman of the conversation that we had about a year ago at this time, when we were faced with raising taxes, and why we had to raise those taxes, and the circumstances that surrounded the increased funding for Union County Public Schools. You'll recall that Union County Public Schools filed a lawsuit against the Union County taxpayers, and we went through a 9-week trial. We had a group of legislators who tried to intervene on our behalf and try to help us come up with a resolution to avoid the county getting sued again by the school board. And we now had, I know you heard from the same people I did, and we heard from a lot of people who said, we can't afford the new tax rate. I can't believe that the schools can sue us. And we had 2 of our own delegation vote against eliminating the ability of the school board to sue the county taxpayers. 2 of our own voted against eliminating the school board's ability to sue the county commissioner. The same motion that you got, very admirably, you got the Board of County Commissioners to take up, and they tried to promote this. And so I reemphasize the need for better communication with Raleigh, and I think we can't do it as individuals. And we can't afford to have another tax increase based on the school board suing us again in the future, if it comes to that. We've got to have some communication with Raleigh, and I think this is an absolute novel idea to put something in place to have a very structured form of communication so that our delegation knows exactly where we stand, and they're not hearing from Richard Helms or Stoney Rushing or Lance Simpson or Jerry Simpson or myself. They're hearing from us as a group, as a board of 5. So I support Commissioner Jerry Simpson's motion, and I think it's, I admire you for putting it on the agenda, and I hope that you will stand with us and send the message to Raleigh that we need their help, and we want to give them the information and the credentials so that they know our position.
Commissioner Rushing.
What's the lobbyist's name?
What we would do is we would go out and seek quotes from at least 3. I know Michelle has done some research on those that have expertise in local government.
So that you're going to bring a list to the board?
What we would do is we would go out to at least 3. We would seek quotes. We would bring back staff's recommendation as to which firm we think is best equipped to represent Union County.
Commissioner Lance Simpson.
I appreciate your comments. I agree that we need a greater voice because for some reason nobody's listening to us in Raleigh. So with that, I support the motion as well.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Can
Commissioner
I
Rushing?
offer a friendly amendment that the commissioners be able to interview the 3 lobbyists who are going to speak on our behalf?
I would not accept that friendly amendment.
I won't be supporting the motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
The motion or the amendment?
I'm sorry.
What we vote on?
Motion.
The motion?
Yes.
He didn't accept it.
He didn't accept it.
We didn't accept the amendment, so for the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have item 8, the Community Stakeholders Committee. Background, at the April 20th, 2015 special meeting, the board approved establishing a Community Stakeholders Committee to study and recommend a volunteer fire department funding model and contract that addresses the volunteer fire department's needs and provides a financially sustainable model now and into the future. The motion included a community stakeholder committee. It is to present its recommendations to the Board of Commissioners no longer than January 15, 2016, which will give us time to implement the new funding model by July 1st, 2016. The motion further included a recommendation that the committee consist of representatives from 3 of the 5 fire districts, 5 of the fire fee districts, Commissioner Jerry Simpson, Vice Chairman Stoney Russian, who would serve as commission representatives, an agricultural representative, community business representative, and a municipality representative and citizen representative. I have a list of those individuals that we bring forth. And they are Mr. Ron Fowler, Stephen McClendon, Johnny Blythe, Don Gaddy, Robert Surratt, Devin Balcom, Bill Oak, Billy Knupp, Pete Medlin, Pam Hadley, Christina Frazzini, is that how you pronounce it? Ben Easel, Jerry Simpson, Stoney Russian, Kevin Regola, our fire marshal, Logan Watson, Chad Starnes, James Allen Lee, Kerry Rogers, Butch Plyler, and Baxter Starnes would make up the 21-member board. Any discussion? All in favor of those identified as read? Aye. All opposed, none. These ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to seeing the results of y'all's work and have all the confidence in the world that they will bring back a solution to our committees. Next, 8A, Commissioner Akmus, I think you had a resolution you wanted to present.
I do. So tonight we heard from residents of several residents of Weddington, and certainly in the past few weeks since Weddington took their action, we've heard from an even larger number of Weddington constituents and residents. And as a result, the county taking the action that we've taken, certainly with just announcing the formation of this panel, I would just ask that this board send a resolution asking Weddington to postpone their action until this panel can consider all aspects of fire coverage for Union County. The findings of the panel may or may not support Providence or any other fire department in the county. But I think to keep everything on an even playing field as it is today, so that this panel can come up with a suitable solution for all of the residents of Union County, I just ask that our board send that resolution to Weddington Town Council to reconsider the dissolution of the Providence Fire Department until such time that a countywide fire funding model has been discussed and agreed upon, and then they can take whatever action they deem appropriate at that time. And I do have a resolution that's been provided, and I'll read it. Whereas the Union County Board of Commissioners has created a committee to discuss countywide fire funding to ensure the safety of all Union County citizens, and that committee will report back to the county in January 2016. Whereas the method of funding for the Wesley Chapel Volunteer Fire Department could change next year, leaving the town of Weddington unsure of equipment and funding that can be provided by Wesley Chapel. Whereas the equipment owned by the Providence Fire Department will no longer be placed in the Weddington Municipal Fire District, and the purchase of new equipment will violate the funding freeze policy adopted by the county until 2016. whereas Providence VFD has provided service to Union County for 60 years and wishes to continue providing that service, and the Board of County Commissioners wish to honor that 60-year commitment to safety by requesting additional time to honor that service, whereas the Union County Board of Commissioners has expressed a desire to help struggling VFDs in Union County, whereas the Union County Board of County Commissioners desire to retain the volunteers and equipment provided by Providence as a part of Union County Fire Protection, whereas there is uncertainty within the fire ratings and insurance implications to residents outside of the Weddington Municipal Fire District, and the insurance cost could or could not be higher than any tax savings, whereas there is uncertainty in aid agreements in the areas surrounding the Weddington Municipal Fire District. Now, therefore, the Board of County Commissioners does hereby adopt that resolution. So I would just ask that my colleagues consider adopting that and sending that to the town of Weddington, just asking for a temporary hold on their actions until such time as our panel has reached a decision.
Can I ask, has our legal counsel reviewed and approved this?
Mr. Chairman, I was provided the resolution late today. I don't know who prepared it. I have reviewed it. The action requested is for Weddington, it appears, to continue contracting with Providence Volunteer Fire Department, frozen at the current level until June 30th of 2016. It appears to me that the resolution is in order, if that's something the board wants to adopt.
Okay. Mr. Rush.
You know, when we had our hearing a couple weeks ago and had all the fire departments in, you know, that night I was ready to vote for a countywide fire tax. I was ready to hit it and go, and let's start it and continue on. And you know, the pleas that I heard from the firemen for creating a committee and discussing this really hit home, and thought better of it because of the service that they had given. And the most that we can do is ask the town of Weddington to do something about this. That's the most we can do. We're very limited. We're handcuffed, basically. But the least we can do for the firefighters at Providence Fire Department is ask the same. So I would say that I would ask that, please, that every commissioner up here consider voting for this resolution, just to ask, because that's all we can do, and just give these folks more time. They've given 60 years of service, and like it was said, you know, what's to ask for 6 more months? And I'm going to support that resolution, and would hope that everybody else would too, just in the spirit of the volunteers at Providence.
Commissioner Jerry Simpson.
Well, this has been one of those tough ones, so I want to make just a few comments. I've said many times, sitting in this chair, probably to the ad nauseum of a lot of people, that he who governs least governs best. And no offense to any of our 14, 15 municipalities, how many of them there are. Sometimes I think if we just had one county boundary and no municipal boundaries, it'd be a whole lot easier to do business up here. But that being said, I recognize, as a commissioner, I recognize and respect a municipality's sovereignty and the community's desire for self-determination. Having said that, I just remind us all that no one is an island unto himself, and that our actions, whether intentional or unintended, impact our neighbors and often the entire county, sometimes multiple counties. The last thing that I want to do is choose sides in an issue involving the town of Weddington, particularly when we've just been tasked as a board with leading a county-wide study on this issue. I think with the way the resolution is worded, that I can support it, and ask that the decision makers in Weddington at least respect our board's efforts to provide the best fire protection at the least cost to all of Union County, understanding that by fully vetting the issue and the impacts of our decisions over the next few months, we can come up with a plan that will benefit all concerned.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Lance Simpson?
I agree with Commissioner Simpson's comments. I respect the town of Weddington's authority on this issue. However, my concern is that at some point down the line, the county and other taxpayers within the county are going to be asked to supplement the town of Weddington's decision, and I cannot place that burden on other taxpayers. So with that, I would ask the town of Weddington to reconsider this as well, or at least come up with a plan and make it public so that everyone knows that that money is available and that other taxpayers would not be called upon and that there's a plan available. So I would support the resolution.
And I appreciate Commissioner Jerry Simpson's comments, because interfering with a town's sovereignty is a very slippery slope. However, I clearly respect the Providence Volunteer Fire Department and the 60 years they've dedicated to providing service to our citizens. And to ask, and if you go back to what I read earlier, it says we have no legal authority to impose upon Weddington. In no way does any comments we make or resolutions we make are trying to breach that. So that's the only reserve I have. It's a slippery slope once we start trying to tell towns what to do. But this is kind of a unique situation. And I've heard a lot from several of the residents. And also, I have set up a meeting tomorrow morning with the mayor and the insurance commissioner, the fire marshal, and the two chiefs, not just one, the two chiefs of the two fire departments, to ensure that whatever action's taken is the best for the citizens of Union County. And I'll have to agree, I support a resolution making our thoughts known, but not imposing, not in an attempt to impose on Weddington the Board of Commissioners' wishes. All in favor of the motion by presented, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay. All right. Appointments to boards and committees. South Piedmont Community College Board of Trustees, we have a vacancy for an unexpired term. Union County has 3 appointments to the South Piedmont Community College Board of Trustees. There's a vacancy to one of these appointments due to the recent death of a member. The term expires for the appointment on June 30th, 2016. We've had 4 individuals apply for this. Mr. Philip Scott Morris, Lawrence McCrank, Gary Salick, and Larissa Taylor. Also, we received a letter from the Board of Trustees of South Piedmont Community College, and it's included in our agenda package, asking that we appoint a commissioner to this position. Commissioner Agmus has expressed interest, indicated his interest in filling this vacancy. And with that, I'd like to move to appoint Commissioner Agmus to the South Piedmont Board of Trustees for the remaining term. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Okay. Next, we have the Nursing Home Advisory Committee. There are at least 6 vacancies on the Nursing Home Advisory Committee. The vacancies have been advertised and 2 applications have been received. Gail Brown and Maurice Robinson. Do I have a motion to appoint? Commissioner Rushing.
Motion to appoint Gail Brown and Maurice Robinson.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Next, County Manager. Your comments,
And I will
please.
keep it brief. I have nothing to say this evening. Thank you.
Commissioner Jerry Simpson.
I've been chatty Cathy this evening, so I'll not say another word.
Commissioner Akins.
All right, well, I'll just start by thanking Pastor Bradley for those inspiring words that kicked off our meeting. You're right, he did talk a little different than some of the folks around here, but I really enjoyed his message.
Well, Frank, so do you.
So I really enjoyed that. I also want to congratulate Jeff Yates and the finance team for the popular annual financing award. It has become commonplace, as the chairman said, and for that I am very proud, and the taxpayers of Union County appreciate what has become commonplace in transparency. I also want to thank my colleagues that unanimously supported the resolution to Weddington. As has been indicated, certainly we are not in any position to act judicially or legislatively over the town of Weddington, but I think it sends a clear message to the constituents of both the town municipal of Weddington and the citizens of Union County that we don't look at things in just a pocket, that we truly try to make decisions that are best for Union County as a whole. And I think through the resolution, the wording of the resolution, I think that our ask is simply to acknowledge what Providence has provided and acknowledge that we are asking for time to consider a true funding mechanism for all of Union County that may or may not include the Providence Volunteer Fire Department. So with that, I just thank my colleagues for their unanimous support, and with that, I wish everyone a good evening.
No additional comments.
Commissioner Rushing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I've referred to in our lobbyist discussion not last week, week before, an email blast was sent out that indicated that the Union County Board of Commissioners was less than supportive of hunting in North Carolina. And I will tell you this, all of my fellow commissioners are wonderful Second Amendment advocates. They are for youth sports and youth hunting, just as our Union County Public Schools. We have our teams went and competed last week at state and did very good there. Piedmont came in 5th in the state, which was very stiff competition. And thank you to the school system. Thank you, Leslie and Michael Guzman, for being here tonight, and look forward to continued discussions with the schools. And again, just to reassure all the Union County citizens, you have a board that believes in your Second Amendment rights. Thank you.
And I'd like to also thank Jeff and his team for their continued excellence, being recognized by the state. Ms. Boyd and Ms. Guzman, I really appreciate y'all coming to be with us tonight. And I appreciate the residents of Weddington coming to share their concerns, and also the library representatives that they've been here. I think this is the 3rd week in a row they've been here, and very patient, and we appreciate it. For that, I wish everyone a good evening and make a motion for adjournment.
Aye.